Welcome to the Member Engagement Show, the podcast for association professionals, brought to you by Higher Logic. I'm your host, Kelly Whelan, and in each episode, we'll talk to guests whose expertise will help you gain new members, boost retention, and deepen member involvement, all goals that can transform your organization. I invite you to subscribe to the podcast so you don't miss an episode, and visit us at higherlogic.com/podcasts to catch the best of past episodes. Now, let's start the show. Welcome back to the Member Engagement Show. Today, I'm joined by Bekah Weidner. Bekah is one of Higher Logic's expert strategic advisors. She helps our customers achieve community engagement and membership growth goals, and she has a wealth of experience working with a variety of associations and nonprofits to address challenges and improve their strategies. So welcome back to the show, Bekah. I know you've been on before. So I know we've been hearing from many of our customers and from the association and nonprofit sector in general via kind of benchmark reports and industry events. We're hearing a lot about economic uncertainty. Some organizations may be losing grant funding right now, or facing budget cuts, or seeing a downturn in membership spending in general. So I invited you, Bekah, on the show today so we could talk about some ideas associations can use to boost their revenue during this time of economic uncertainty.
Yeah, sure. This is definitely something I'm hearing more and more from the associations that I'm chatting with. I just met with a group this week that their membership's going down due to the uncertainty. And I know today we're chatting about non-dues revenue, but in that case, they had already made a clear connection between their community value and somebody engaging in the community and retaining their membership. So we really thought about targeted engagement in that use case. But non-dues revenue is another way to kind of fill that gap if membership's decreasing with the uncertainty, everything that's going on.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's all about, in this current era, having a diverse set of sources of revenue so that if you see one of them lagging, you then have this kind of backup to supplement that. So you're not just relying on membership dues. If that goes down, you're not just relying on webinars or conferences. It helps if you have that kind of diversified revenue stream coming in. And I think, like you said, some of the things that you might do that you aim to use for non-due strategies might also be things that are providing value to your members. So they're doing double duty and they're boosting retention as well, which is awesome.
Yeah, and I actually came from an association that was really good at non-dues revenue programming to where we were less worried about, we also retain our members, but if we had trouble, we had that revenue in our back pocket. Mm-hmm. And it was just less of a concern overall. So we could really focus more on value and not on getting that money in. I mean, that's ideally a good spot to be in if you can kind of know you have a lot of revenue streams coming.
Yeah. I think there are a couple avenues associations can and do pursue when they're looking to bring in additional revenue or non-dues revenue. And I wonder if you could start us out by outlining what you see some of those are.
We can start with the most obvious, which would be sponsorship and advertising. This can be done through community, through marketing, events. More specifically, in the community tool, the Thrive tool that I'm most familiar with, we do have the ability to set discussion ads per community, per discussion that can appear in email. They can appear on the community itself, as well as website advertising. Sponsorship, I've seen sponsoring a community, I've seen sponsoring a blog, or really any content that's provided through the association and through the community. There may be an opportunity there for sponsorship.
Yeah, I like that example because I think it kind of ties to, like you said, it's maybe the most obvious thing that you think of when you're thinking of bringing in non-dues revenue. But sometimes I think people get stuck in thinking about the ways that they've done it in the past, and they might not think of some of the other ways they can do it. So, for example, my association that I worked with previously, we had always done sponsorship at our annual conference. And that was in a downturn even before like the height of COVID. But after COVID, obviously that's even more so of a like we're not getting that sponsorship revenue from the event. And that forced us to get a little more creative around having more digital sponsorship. And it started out with our newsletter had ad space that we would include at the bottom of the newsletter. And that was selling out consistently. And instead of kind of trying to squeeze more ads into that one space, we decided to take that as a sign like, hey, email advertising is what our sponsors are looking for right now. So we added ad space to our weekly digest email, and we added ad space to our research ethics digest, which was like a more of a publication. And from there, we even added sponsored like chaperoned emails for close partners, where if they had a resource that was really relevant to our audience, we would allow them to purchase, essentially sending out an email that just advertised something they had. Obviously, we monitored that closely to make sure that we weren't harming our engagement levels with our members, but that was super helpful to be able to expand in those manners. And then, of course, as we matured in our community strategies, we also started testing community ads. And one thing I will call out when you're starting out with a new thing is you might want to test it and have it at a lower price point to start to get people to join on and start purchasing it. And you'll then probably notice, or at least we noticed, that other sponsors see those sponsors show up in those places and then they want to take part. They're like, oh, hey, I just saw, XYZ organization sponsored in this association's newsletter, and now I want that. How do I get that? And that was really helpful for us to both kind of price it lower when it was a newer piece and maybe even reach out to people who regularly sponsored to say, hey, we have a new thing. Do you want to try it out at a discounted rate or as a complimentary offering? Because we know you already give us a lot of money. So that could be really helpful as well. So I think there's just a lot of opportunities for sponsorship that folks can explore.
Yeah, like you mentioned, actually the email digest from a community, if you have a super active community, that's going to be that coveted spot, I feel like, in many cases that those advertisers are going to want. And once they kind of see that that's possible, I think now you can expand to, okay, well, how often are we filling with this with different people? Is this a program where they get this ad for a whole 3 months, a whole 6 months? And then you can price accordingly, kind of once you've already established that has a lot of value. And if you're tracking clicks, I have noticed the digest clicks are very, very high. The web does good too, but that's kind of where members are looking for those updates from each other. So it's a very untapped opportunity in a lot of cases. The other thing that I wanted to mention was you could start off using that space as advertising for your own events or programs. And that is also a good test case. And it also could bring in revenue to your association through, if they're paid events. Or maybe it's a program that you just know if people get involved in this program, they're going to be a lot more sticky as a member. So I'm thinking, for example, mentorship. Let's say if someone clicks in on a mentoring ad, gets connected to a mentor through the association, now you've created a very loyal, sticky member, and that's indirectly helping retain revenue for your association as well. So yeah, that use case could be good as well, maybe as a test or maybe just as a way to create revenue.
We used to do that anytime we had a opening in the calendar, because I kept a calendar of our sponsorships so that we knew which months people were in which newsletters or on the web or on the community. And anytime we had an opening, I would put an ad for one of our programs, because that space was something members were getting used to seeing, like some kind of visual element showing them something that was coming up. And that way we were never losing that opportunity. We could fill the opportunity. And even if, first of all, like you said, if it's in the community digest, that's a high click opportunity. But even if we weren't seeing those clicks, it actually served as like advertising for sponsorship again, because sponsors were seeing, wait a minute, there's that space in the bottom of the email. Maybe I could have that space. So that was really helpful. Something you mentioned too about kind of bundling sponsorship, I think is really worth thinking about. Again, if you have partners that you work with regularly, my goal was always to be like bringing in a decent amount of revenue without creating too much work for myself. So anytime I could bundle things for a sponsor and get them to sign on for multiple things so that it was one sponsor to manage instead of six, I would always do that. The other thing I would say to our listeners is if you are having really successful sponsorship options, don't be afraid to raise the price. If it's constantly selling out and you have, let's say, 12 newsletters a year, and that is a high value item for sponsors, and it's always selling out, it's time to raise the price on that and let the sponsors and see if the sponsors still purchase it. Because even if you see maybe one less sponsor, if you're still making the same amount of money, it's actually less work for you for the same amount of money. So you have to kind of test and balance that. But I would say that was something that took me a moment to realize in my own journey of doing the sponsorship, of saying, wait a minute, these don't have to be like priced at the absolute floor. I don't need to sell them all out. I need to make the revenue I want to make. It doesn't matter like how many I sell. It matters more the dollar amount that I'm bringing in.
Yeah, I would agree. Sometimes it can be scary to raise prices. You don't think people are going to want to pay it. I think it's important to remember also the value your association has as that like subject matter leader in the industry. And there's a lot of value there for an advertiser or a sponsor just to be associated with you,
Yeah.
beyond just how many clicks they might get. And we can price knowing kind of our own value in a sense as being that leader in the profession, and knowing that we're where members come to get that expertise. So if their name is associated with you, that is really, really high quality leads for them.
Absolutely. I mean, think about how, even in our own personal lives, I think there's this prevalence of what I feel like most people call influencer marketing now, where it's more you want to hear from other people that they like a certain product, or you want to see that product associated with groups or people that you trust. And I think in that environment, associations thrive as a sponsor opportunity because, like you said, Bekah, having sponsors do more of that thought leadership stuff, not necessarily just a promotion for an event or an ad for whatever product they're selling. But when they have resources or something that are valuable or helpful to your members, not only is that better value for your members, because again, I understand as an association, you're balancing that you want to bring in maybe more revenue from sponsorship, but you don't want to turn off your members. You don't want them to feel like, oh gosh, we're being sold to all the time. And the good thing is sponsorships are more successful when they're thought leadership, and that's more what your members want too. So you could have sponsors doing like a sponsored template or something in your community. You could have them be a guest on a webinar talking about a topic that they have expertise on. You could have them write a newsletter article, again, on a topic they have expertise on. And that was something I always did in my own management of the sponsorship program, was talk to our partners about the ways that they could be most successful and encourage them to do those thought leadership pieces, to not just kind of throw away an ad of, hey, buy this thing, but instead position themselves as someone that could help our members, because then the members would think of them when they needed something.
Yeah, and often what a sponsor or an advertiser really is looking for is access. So if there are ways to, of course, in-person events, that's easier because you're like, oh, we'll just have a sponsored reception. The sponsors come, our leadership comes, and now they feel like they've gotten that access to our leadership because they sponsored an event. Online, maybe that could look like something like an Ask Me Anything event, or maybe you have an online networking call and you let the sponsor facilitate that call. And then they're getting in the room with people and they're able to build relationships, but it's not in just a sales and client dynamic. It's in a dynamic of we're together in a room and we're all just chatting and providing value.
Yeah, I think that positions it very well as maybe less as sponsorship and more as partnership, which I feel like is something you and I have talked about before, Bekah, where if you start seeing your sponsors as partners, or maybe select sponsors as partners, ones that you trust and know that have lots of value to offer your members, that can be a really good way to rethink how you use them.
Yeah, definitely. And then the other thing I feel like is really important for any type of non-dues revenue program is making sure we're always cognizant of the purpose of the space that this is taking place in, right? So how can we bring value to those sponsors or partners in a way that also brings value and exists within whatever ecosystem you're putting that in, right? So for community, we're thinking about this is a member-driven space for conversation. So how, or maybe where they get high-value resources. So how do we position our partners to naturally fit into that space, be a part of that conversation, be associated with what's going on without it feeling as much of just a hard sell through their sponsorship?
That reminded me of something, again, that you and I have talked about before, where kind of changing tacks a bit, when you are using your online community to boost your own programs, you've talked about before making sure that your staff understand what you just said, understand the best ways to use the community to improve visibility for events or education. That's not just sort of posting like, hey, register for this right now. It's more of a, remember, this is a community space, this is a social space. How can we act on that? How can we leverage that to drive excitement for whatever the thing that you're trying to drive excitement is?
One association I work with, this is something that we do on a regular basis, is train their staff on first the value of community for whatever program it is that they're in charge of, and understanding that there can be connections where you might not have even thought there's a connecting point there. But then also training on what does it look like to include a community in a marketing plan, but that not just be a series of posts in a community like, hey, there's this event, come register, because we don't want to use the community primarily as just another, advertising and sales tool, right? So a few approaches that we think about, for example, for an event is who can you bring in kind of being your spokesperson for that event that's a member. So instead of register here, here's this event, you have a member posting, hey, who else is coming to this event? Here's what I'm really excited about. You're going to generate a lot more conversation, a lot more FOMO for that event from seeing members engage around it than you are from just simply posting it again in the community the same as you would in an email that you're marketing with. Another thing to think about is not using like hard calls to action in the community, but thinking about using learn more instead of register now, buy this now, kind of making it feel like you're more educating than you are selling, even in the calls to action that you're putting in the community. Also, a great tactic maybe for a large annual event would be creating a community that brings in everyone who is attending, but also is publicly visible to members who are not attending. And then they're seeing posts about this event coming through their feed, and it's just naturally creating more FOMO for that event and promoting the event in a way that feels organic and less, oh, I can just use the community to put the same message that I put in my other marketing mediums.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that the examples that you shared, obviously, we're talking about them in the context of trying to drive more registrations, but they strike me as things that are also really valuable for improving engagement because you're starting those conversations where people who are going to the event are having this opportunity to discuss what they're excited about for the event with each other. And that is doing its own marketing for you because other people are seeing that and feeling this sense of they might miss out. I think that's why it's really helpful to, we see year over year in HireLogic's community benchmark report that the more you loop all of your programs to the community, the better the community does, but also the better those programs do because they feed each other. So you have the community becoming this hub where everyone congregates and talks about things. And then they also see opportunities for mentoring, opportunities for events, opportunities for certification or anything like that. And then you also find that that gives people something to talk about in the community. So they're both seeing those opportunities more regularly. And there's a thought starter there happening for people to discuss and to share their own tips about whatever those programs may be. And I love that that stuff is so closely tied.
Yeah, and even at the most basic level, you may not host your events in the community or host your registration there, but at the very basic level, like just displaying those events within the community is creating exposure for those events. So even if you're not doing these more advanced event tactics, if that's where members are coming to engage with that association, why would you not want them to also see these events that you want to register for, even just on an event listing? And I think a lot of groups, because they don't use that tool to actually register and pay for events, they may not want to take that extra time to also post it in the community. But I do think it drives a lot of value to take that few minutes to do that extra step.
Yeah, we used to do that. Our registration actually was run entirely through our AMS, but we would keep the community event calendar up to date so that folks could find things from there, especially because we could also have a little bit of control over the visibility of what different people saw. So there was also the ability to kind of show public events, but also think about like things like board events or committee events. So we had that ability to do that as well. I wonder too if we can talk a little bit about, we just talked about kind of events, registration, that kind of thing in the community, but I'm also thinking about how having a job board or a career center tied to your community can be, well, whether or not it is tied to your community. I think they perform better when they're tied to your community, but even if that's not the case, I think a job board is another thing that can really drive revenue for an association if they're looking for those opportunities. So I wonder if you could speak to that a bit.
Yeah, so just from my own experience at the education association I used to work for, there was a lot of job movement. It was a state-based association. People are moving school districts, right, left and right. So honestly, we would send out a newsletter with lots of great content. The top thing that was clicked was literally a link at the top of the email to the job board. We didn't even have to write a blurb or do anything fancy with it. It was just they wanted to see who's hiring. They wanted to see what's moving. So realizing that that is kind of a top draw to an association, especially for people who are new in the profession, I think if you're able to host it or use a provider, in our case, we partner with WebScribble, but if you can have that connected to your website, to your community, wherever you can land it, that's going to drive people in, and then they might connect to other things of value. But just from what I've seen, job boards are very key resource that really drives people to whatever space it is that you're putting in.
That makes a lot of sense. And I actually had Karen Savarino from Smith Buckland on the show a couple episodes back, and she was talking about how the two leading things they saw in their benchmark report that draw in new members are professional development and job-related things, career-related things. So I think that cannot be overstated how much having a job board brings new people towards the association, whether they're members already and they're not that active or they're not members at all. We also we had a job board at my association and we used it in a couple different ways. It did generate revenue on its own. So like you said, if you're using a product like Higher Logic Thrive Jobs, which as you said is powered by WebScribble, usually those tools have an agreement between the provider and the user that they take a cut, but they help you get all of the job postings and they do all the customer support. So it was truly the easiest thing I did in my job was managing the job board because they did all the work and it brought in like $30,000 with me doing basically nothing. So that was magnificent and very helpful to me as someone who wore a lot of hats in my association. So on that front, it was amazing. Another way that it was really helpful was we would pull reports from the job board of people who posted jobs or had accounts to look for jobs, and we would use that to then send out outreach about membership. So you could get as granular as you want. You could do it more broad, like just anyone who's posting or anyone who has an employee account. You could potentially pull those and just do a general call for membership, but you could get more granular too. If you have specific jobs job roles in your industry that you have specific resources tied to them, you could probably do some really targeted, personalized outreach to folks saying like, hey, you maybe are looking for this type of job and we have this type of resource that's really valuable to someone in that type of job. And you just underscore your value then to a potential member.
Yeah, 100%. I feel like if somebody finds a job or finds their next job through you as an association, that creates loyalty because they've literally advanced in their career because of something that you provided to them. And again, if we're talking about stickiness and retention, that's one more area that you're adding to that member value and keeping them wanting to come back to you.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you're an association that already has a job board and you're trying to think of like ways to bring in more job postings, because that's how we made our money, right? The companies that wanted to post jobs pay for it. It's not that the people who are looking for jobs have to pay to apply. So when we wanted to run like a promotion for the job board to try to get more companies to post jobs, we used to tie that to our events actually and have a job board on site and say, if you buy job postings within this window of time, we will show them like physically on site. It was very low tech. Like we actually just printed out the job postings and put them on the board, but it was highly popular both with our attendees there would be crowds of people in front of that board just browsing jobs, whether they were actively looking for a job or they just wanted to see what was out there. And our job posters got a lot of value out of that because they knew, oh, hey, this is a captive audience of people who are seeking professional development, trying to grow in their career. These are exactly the type of people we would want to hire. And this is a great opportunity to get it posted not only online, but also at the conference. And that always boosted the revenue that we had coming in from the job board, which was awesome. So sometimes it's just about thinking of creative ways. And I think you've said something to this effect before, Bekah, of asking yourself what you already do that you could tie a sponsor to or tie some kind of like bring in more money through it.
Yeah, for sure. One of the organizations I work with, they have a sponsor for their legislative report. And that, is a top viewed piece of content in the community and through their email marketing. And they're already doing it. So why not find a sponsor to be associated with that content? This could also be a webinar program, maybe one that you offer for free to members or that you already are offering for free. Why not get a sponsor? And now it's sponsored by this group. And that's only adding revenue for you, and it's not taking additional work. It might be a blog program or a member spotlight program that you already have running through your community, adding a sponsorship to that. So I think it's important to do an assessment of where are the ways we're already providing really good member value and the benefits that members most look forward to, and how can we maybe use that as an opportunity to draw in additional revenue by partnering with a sponsor or someone who maybe is in the field who can provide that expert advice and just add even more value to that program as well. That's kind of the first step, is looking for where they're just natural ties that we're not taking advantage of currently.
I think you can also ask yourself, are there gaps you're trying to fill that a trusted sponsor could fill? So, for example, if you know you want templates or checklists around a certain topic and you know that you have a partner that is an expert in that area or could find an expert in that area, why not let them produce that piece and then post it in your community or in your resource library or what have you with that sponsor's logo on it? And now you've not only brought in the money, but you've brought in more resources for your members because you've outsourced them essentially to external organizations, and you're getting value on both sides of that.
And maybe there's a program or a tool that you just know is in high demand for your members. This was the main way that the association I used to work for got revenue, were sponsored programs where we kind of chose some programs and put our name next to it as vetted programs. And for that, there was a percentage share of profits that came through the association. So maybe there's some things that members are looking for in just providers for something. And if you can kind of find a way to co-brand that with your association, now they're finding a valuable program and you're getting a cut. So that worked really nicely.
Yeah, that sounds like a really great way to, again, leverage things that would happen anyway in a way that helps your members and your bottom line without adding staff work. Because again, as someone who had to manage marketing for the organization and the sponsorship, like it does take it can take a lot of time, but there are ways to balance it so that you're not adding too much to your workload because it's kind of tied into things that you already do. I feel like we've covered a lot of different areas on this episode, and I'm wondering if you feel like we've missed anything, Bekah. Is there anything else that you would call out for our listeners?
I just kind of want to drive back to a couple of points that we've kind of talked about. One is just always remembering that any non-dues revenue opportunity should connect to your core mission as well as to the purpose of the space that it's being included in. I'm thinking most of community, but there might be other ways to associate that. And then also taking a look, as we just talked about, at what you have existing that provides value and where revenue could be added to that value opportunity. Ultimately, what you want is it to be, I'm going to use an office reference here, but you want a win for your association. You want a win for that partner sponsor. You want it to be a win for members. And now you have a win because you have successfully negotiated a non-dues revenue deal. So that's what I'll leave you with.
I love that as like a capstone statement, and I love the office reference. I feel like I don't know how so many people in the association world I feel like I run into are big office fans. Well, thank you so much for coming on the show, Rebekah. This is super helpful to just chat through some ideas for generating revenue for associations. For folks listening, I'm going to include 2 resources in the show notes. First, I want to call out that we have a webinar coming up called From Engagement to Non-Dues Revenue, Monetizing Your Online Community. And that's going to be on September 10th. And we've got a great panel of folks, including some internal experts, as well as some folks who work at associations, including, it looks like ACF and IPMI. So they're going to share some of the ways that they've generated revenue in their association. So I hope you'll join us and get some more tips for using community, especially to bring in revenue for your association. The other thing I'll include in the show notes is our non-dues revenue success kit, which collects some of our written resources around generating revenue besides membership dues. So hope you will check those out and see what works from those for you and your association. All right, thanks everybody. We'll see you next time.